So hello everybody, and welcome to the second IT at Cork Executive Fireside Chat series. So I wanted to start off today by thanking our event sponsors, KPMG, who've been a massive support to the organisation all throughout the year, and again through this series, which is very much appreciated. Today I wanted to welcome John and Joanne Wrenn, who we are delighted to host, as I said, on our second series. So John, Joanne, if I can invite you guys in, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
All good, thank you. So guys, look, thank you very much for agreeing to do the session. We got a lot of kind of really good kind of positive feedback. Obviously, you guys come with a very strong network, right? So thank you very much for agreeing to do it. It's a different approach that we've kind of taken on the second one, right? So very happy to have you guys on here today, right? And look, I suppose just jumping straight into it, right? So you're obviously based in California. I think a lot of people got to see your bios. So California has gone from, COVID lockdown to forest fire lockdown, back into COVID lockdown, elections, more lockdowns coming. How are you guys doing? I suppose, how are the companies doing, etc.?
Yeah, well, it's lovely to see you, Anthony. I think first off, we're doing great, despite missing Ireland and missing our family and friends. 2020 is definitely going to go down as a year we'll never forget. But we're really fortunate. We have a nice place to live, a roof over our head. Our son is doing really well, so we can't really complain. From a LinkedIn perspective, it's been a year with many challenges. For many of you, LinkedIn is all about creating economic opportunity for everyone in the workforce. And, the pandemic has put a lot of people into really tough positions. So a lot of folks are really accelerating the need to learn new skills and find jobs. So over the last couple of months, we've been doing a ton of work and producing a lot of new tools and resources to help meet that demand. Just recently, actually, in the last couple of weeks, we launched a couple of products, one called Career Explorer, which helps people. It's a really neat tool. It's very near and dear to my heart, but it shows you, based on the skills you have, the types of opportunities and jobs that you could qualify for. I think what is nice then is it kind of transitions into LinkedIn Learning and a lot of the courses, where if there is a skill gap and you're trying to kind of fit some of those skill gaps, it provides you with access to learning paths to help with that. And then there's a couple of other really nice features. One, a really simple kind of button on your LinkedIn profile to indicate that you're open to work. But equally, there's a new kind of button that you can indicate that you're hiring. So just to try and match people with jobs and skills. I found out over the last couple of weeks as well, about 42,000 people in Ireland have already taken access with a lot of the learning paths that are available. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, and well, thanks, Anthony, for hosting us and inviting us on. I think from a Flex perspective, the year has also been challenging. But I guess interestingly, we're dealing with the pandemic really early, right? We have 17 factories in China. So back in January and February, we ended up going into lockdown in China pretty early. We extended Chinese New Year and had to, close those factories for a few weeks. And as obviously then some of the cities opened up and regions, we were able to open up our factories. And I guess what we learned through March and April there in terms of operational procedures to deal with social distancing in the factories, bringing people back in a coordinated way. We even have dormitories in China as well, because we house a lot of people on site. So a lot of the conditions there had to change. And but what that meant was, as the pandemic came through Europe and the Americas, our ops facilities and our procedures that we learned in Asia could be brought into those regions, which meant as much as possible we We maintained operations, obviously coping with the guidelines from a health perspective in each of those countries. You know, and you know, we went through a tough few months like everybody, like all companies. But you know, we came out the other side in kind of calendar Q2, which is our Q1. And then from a business perspective, we ended up pivoting, right? So we have a large medical business, and through that, we actually got a lot of requests to help with the ventilator market in particular. Flex had never made a ventilator ever, and we ended up co-collaborating with a number of customers on both design and manufacturing. And by I think the end of calendar Q2, kind of June, July, we were one of the largest ventilator manufacturers in the world. And we continue to be and continue to you know, help customers and obviously hospitals with that. So you know, we just had a really strong last quarter, Q3 or Q3, and you know, the business is being maintained. So I think we're coping as well as we can.
And I think it's fascinating. Look at, let's say, I mean, obviously you spent a lot of time working in Flex as well, and let's say people normally think that large companies are very inflexible, right? But I think Flex was testament to the fact that that isn't the case, right? You know, how quickly, you know, let's say the consumer side or the electronic side went down, but the healthcare side was able to pivot very quickly and come back, right? I mean, it's just a fascinating story around how kind of massive companies like Flex and like LinkedIn can pivot, let's say when the market requires it, right? But yeah, it's been a challenging few months for everybody, right? And I think, let's say, I mean, it continues to be, right? And it's just, we're all, I suppose, figuring this out as we go as well, right? And as we get into the next iteration of the pandemic, right, we're kind of dealing with that as it comes, right? I think the good thing for all of us is that we've kind of figured out, you know, when to panic versus when not to panic, which may not be the case at the very start of it, right? Where we're all probably panicking at that point, right? But look, you know, it's been a massive learning, but yeah, I mean, look, if we've come through this, we can come through anything. And unfortunately, you guys have had a bit more to deal with there with the, you know, the whole forest fire situations, etc., right? But no, look, great to hear, right? And I suppose, guys, just on the thought around pivoting, right? So if we kind of look at your careers, right? So look, you know, you've both had, you know, fascinating careers, I suppose. You know, Joanne, you being a VP within, you know, let's call it one of the most influential companies in the last decade, right? You know, something that is a service that we all use every day. I know I certainly use it every day. And, you know, John, you being a CTO of a company that, you know, everybody probably comes in contact with every day, but doesn't really realize it in terms of the products and the services that you manufacture, right? So do either of you want to kind of take a shot at, you know, kind of telling me where it all began, you know, versus where you are right now? Was there a master plan that kind of led you to this point? You know, how are you kind of feeling about where you are right now and kind of how you got there?
Yeah, I can go first. Sure. I think my path to here was extremely non-traditional and non-linear. There was no master plan. I think there was an insatiable curiosity always. I think that's something that I've kept with me throughout my career. I moved to San Francisco in the early 90s on the back of a green card that I won in the Morrison Visa lottery. And I kind of landed on my feet in a certain respect. I worked in the financial services industry in the beginning. Specifically in an insurance company, and just kind of found myself essentially in a career in customer success, and learned a lot. And at the time, you know, the city was changing. It was right at the beginning of the dot-com boom, and a lot of my friends had started to kind of move into tech companies. And I found myself again through a network I ended up working in a tech company that was in the insurance industry space. So I kind of parlayed my experience that way, and then fell in love with project management, you know, studied hard and mastered that craft of project management, and worked in a couple of different small startup companies where project management was probably the essence of my job. But for anybody who works in a small company, you do everything. You do whatever is needed to help the company win. I then met John in San Francisco, and we decided that I would move back from San Francisco back to Cork. And at that point ended up working in an Irish-owned company that was based in Cork at the time, in the oil and gas industry. So it couldn't have been more different. My role there was around business applications, and I probably started my love of HR from that particular job. I worked closely with the HR team and implemented a HR system and a recruiting system, along a bunch of other things, and worked there and absolutely loved that experience. It brought me to places in the world I never thought I would visit. It gave me exposure to a different industry and a different business. And then when John got an opportunity to move back for me, but move to Silicon Valley for him, we took it. And I ended up at LinkedIn through another relationship. So a good friend of mine who I had worked with in San Francisco was working at LinkedIn at the time. And she opened the door and welcomed me in. At the time, we were about 2,000 employees. It was growing rapidly in every single team. I ended up in the HR technology team and have just been on that rocket ship since then. So it's just been a very kind of interesting route. But I look back on my career, and every single role I've had has led me to this. So I've taken something from every different team I've worked on or company I've been in. And it plays into kind of what I do today. So yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's quite a journey, right? And would you say, Joanne, that kind of looking back now, right? Obviously, kind of jumping different industries, right? Would you say that's a very important kind of feature of your role, of your kind of career history, as well as kind of having that multiple industry experience as well, has been very important for you?
It has been for me. I think, again, I am a lifelong learner, and I'm just incredibly curious. So it's been very stimulating for me just to kind of like move every 5 or 6 years into kind of something completely new. So I do tend to throw myself into the deep end. So for me, that has been what has kind of lit me up along the journey.
Awesome. That's awesome. And John, I might ask you the same. Look, obviously, I kind of know your career very well. I mean, for those of you that don't know, John was the person that hired me first. It was my first kind of, let's say, proper boss into IT. So look, what?
All those years ago.
Yeah, I mean, let's say I'd say you've an incredible eye for talent, right? But look, I suppose kind of the same kind of question for yourself, right? Obviously, let's say, I mean, Flex is just so big, you can kind of have multiple careers within the company, right? But just kind of talking through your own kind of career, kind of leading to the CTO role that you have today in Flex.
Yes, yeah, sure, yeah. So I guess, yeah, my career has been a little bit different to Joanne, and in the sense I've worked for Flex for over 20 years now. Flex was my third job out of college, so didn't go there quite straight away. But I do remember, just to kind of bring it forward, and then I'll bring it back to Silicon Valley. But in my first job, I was managing the ERP system there, systems administrator. I had programmed in Fortran, blast from the past, in college, and our ERP system was written in Fortran. And so I had a desk outside the mainframe area, and above my desk, somebody had put a poster of Silicon Valley. And I always remember, like, it was one of these posters where it had the Bay Area and the Valley, and there was a lot of companies, right, that were kind of just imprinted, and you could see kind of all their locations. And it was up there for a couple of years. So it was a place, I guess, that I always had aspired to come into, and maybe always in the back of my mind. But I guess, yeah, from there, I did a couple of years doing that. The company at the time in Cork, the factory in Cork was growing like crazy. This was the late 90s, and a lot of business coming in. We didn't realize it at the time, but I guess the manufacturing boom, had really started in Ireland. And within 2 years, I was the IT manager. Anthony, I brought you on, and you were part of that team that we built, right? We had probably 25, 30 people eventually. There was only 2 when I started. And then we expanded into Europe over the next few years. I think we ended up with about 7 locations in Ireland at one point, and I became the IT manager for those locations. And then a few years later, the CIO at the time asked me, would I run operations for Europe, which was a big jump, right? So that was a director role. 42 sites. I hadn't been to half of them at that point, you know, and so, you know, taking that step up was my first time reporting back to corporate, which was here in San Jose. Did that for a few years, and then around 2007, 2008, Flex changed into business segments, and so the company reorganized, and I headed up our IT for our business segment that ran logistics and services. So about 27 sites spread from Hong Kong, China, India, Singapore, across Europe, into the Americas, down into Mexico. And so that was my remit. I traveled a lot, so I met Joanne, coming back and forth to headquarters here. And then I did that for about 5 years. And at a certain point, I was out here one week in 2012, and my boss was talking about a VP for innovation and cloud services, and wanting to kind of set up this group, and wanted to be a cloud first company. And we got chatting about potentially me taking on the role, and he was like, well, I would have offered it to you, but you know, you don't live here. And that got into a discussion about, would you move? And I said, give me a few minutes. And I went outside the building, rang Joanne, and she said, let's do it in about 30 seconds. And I guess that was us pivoting to Silicon Valley. And so we moved. Our son was 3 when we moved. And I guess we haven't looked back. And I ended up actually running all of our corporate systems then. So that there was the cloud role, which was a major track. But very soon I got all of our corporate systems. So across all of our functions at corporate, ended up with a very large team. Spent a lot of time in our development centers in Mexico, here in San Jose, and in India. And then about 2 years ago, I got offered the CTO role, and I've been doing that now. So leading up our technology strategy for the company.
And you know, I think it's very interesting listening to both of you, right? Because I suppose, Joanne, back to yours, kind of jumping into the kind of HR area, an area that you hadn't really, you know, initially had much kind of, you know, I suppose kind of jumping in there with kind of both feet, and kind of, John, you jumping into like going from the IT manager into managing 40 sites as well at the very early days. You know, how important is it, I suppose, to kind of take a leap of faith? You know, obviously that kind of phone call that you made back to Joanne and kind of deciding in 30 seconds, that was obviously a thought in the back of your head, but obviously there's a leap of faith involved in it, and kind of it sounds like kind of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone is a kind of key part of kind of throughout your career as well, or to kind of keep yourself moving forward. I mean, how important is that, do you think, to you and to others?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I mean, I think as you think about your career, saying yes becomes kind of like this really powerful thing. So I think it's a critical component. And again, I think for us, it's been a complete game changer in our life. So again, I think it's something that's been in me from the beginning. But just kind of having that belief in yourself that, you know, I think what we have, and what a lot of Irish people have, is like an incredible work ethic and a determination and resilience to kind of meet challenges. I think then that, like, the confidence and the self-confidence of just believing in yourself that, you know, you figure it out. I think that is it's an X factor for sure. So yeah,
and I think you know, as you alluded to, Anthony, you kind of have to back yourself, right? And I think, you know, the having a partner, having a you know, your peers, I think people you trust, but ultimately when the opportunity comes up, you back yourself to do it, and you're certainly stretching yourself, and there is that leap of faith. There is that, okay, there's parts of this I don't know. But I think if you're getting offers, then, you know, somebody believes in you, right? Your boss or your boss's boss or a peer, and you know, when you're getting the opportunity, I think you know, if it feels right, and if you're getting a consensus from the people that you trust around you, I think go for it.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. And guys, I might just say, I forgot to say at the start as well, to the attendees, that we are inviting in Q&A throughout the session as well, right? So if there's anything on your mind, then feel free to drop it into the Q&A box as well, right? And we can grab that question as it comes in throughout, right? Joanne, I might just jump back to a point that you mentioned earlier as well around, let's say you being in Silicon Valley in the 90s, and, I suppose you've seen it kind of go from boom to bust to boom to bust, I suppose, a number of times, right? In the last kind of 10 years, I suppose you guys are nearly there 10 years now at this point, right? I mean, let's say, how has it kind of changed in that time, in your opinion, right? It just seems to have just gone from strength to strength.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we live in Mountain View, which is the home of Google, but just down the road is Apple's headquarters. Microsoft has a huge presence here. Facebook is just in Menlo Park, and like just an enormous amount of other tech companies are around. I was thinking, when we moved here in 2013, and Matthew was 3, we would go for walks in the neighborhood, and we would see cars with like all this like equipment, like hardware equipment on top of it. And it was the beginning of the Google self-driving car program, or in the earlier days. But it was just like it looked like something that you'd see in a movie from, the 80s about what it should look like. The cars were branded like Google self-driving cars. And over the years, just that alone, that has just completely changed. So their headquarters is just a mile away from where we live. And now the cars are completely slick. All the hardware is embedded in the body of the car. The branding is Waymo. And, we would be out and about on a Saturday, doing errands. And Matthew and I would count the number of self-driving cars we've seen. And I think our record one day was 26, because they were out doing their test drives. And like that in itself is just a testament of like kind of the area that we live in and the change. There's just always so much going on. And that was just a really good, like visible kind of physical kind of manifestation of that change. I think the other thing that I was thinking of is, during COVID, obviously, in this area, we are in a kind of a shelter in place. So it's limit your movement, but there's not a lot of policing of that. But a lot of our like kind of local small businesses are suffering. And our company set up I think it was in April, May timeframe.
Yeah.
And it's called Starship Technologies. And essentially it is like, it's a robot, but it's a cooler on wheels with technology embedded into it. And they've hooked up with all of our local small grocery stores, the coffee shop, and then some of the restaurants. And through the app, you can just order your kind of like your groceries, and a little cooler literally wheels its way through our neighborhood and delivers it. Like so when I think about like what has changed, I just see constant innovation in our everyday lives. And it's just exciting.
And just on that, like that, sorry, Anthony, the link between that and self-driving cars is these little robots that are literally going around our neighborhood now every day. You go out for a walk and you kind of have to step aside as they're, going along the footpath, but it's the same technology, right? They're looking at stop signs, they're reading traffic lights. They can see obstacles like a person walking, and they'll stop, and then you get out of the way and they move on. But it's the same technology that's in a self-driving car that this company have pivoted and put it into a small little cooler with 6 wheels and allowed it to to bring food to your house. So
it's just amazing. I think that the thing that we've kind of all seen the last few years, I mean, look, change is constant, right? But it's just the rate of change pre-COVID was already phenomenal, but since COVID it's gone off the charts, right? I mean, like even ourselves here, not to the same kind of rate, but like there's kind of drone delivery now kind of happening kind of all over, right? And it's just the acceleration of change is just absolutely phenomenal, right? And I suppose you guys are seeing it there probably months before anybody else, right? It's just phenomenal, I suppose, at the rate that's actually happening at the moment, right? But no, and I suppose back to that kind of answer then, John, in your role as CTO, right? Being based in the heart of Silicon Valley, startups galore, I suppose when you kind of look at your role being responsible for emerging tech, right? What's your approach? Is it best to be the guinea pig and reap the benefits, or is it better to wait for kind of stabilization to ensure continuity, right? And I suppose it must be like moths to a flame, right? In your role.
Yeah, you're right in terms of the amount of startups I come in contact with, me and my team, and come through the door. I guess the way, so in terms of our approach, I think Flex has always been very open anyway to partnerships and innovation. I think in my role, what I'm doing is coordinating that, right, and funneling it so that we can manage it and give any of those startups, any of the technology we come in contact with, the best chance of success. Which is actually one of the foundational reasons why we put the group together, right? So that it wasn't spread out across all of IT and different people come in contact with different companies. So we actually have a very coordinated intake process now. We have deep relationships with a lot of the VCs in the area. We probably are in contact with probably 12 to 15 of them regularly, like every quarter. We meet with them, we understand their portfolio. We have demand that we understand what's coming in from the Flex businesses, and we match that demand. And then, as we bring their technology through our innovation process, our proof of concept, we eventually want to scale them, right? And that is one of the challenges, right? As you said, Anthony, about do you wait for stabilization or product stabilization versus the early adopter stage? And we're definitely open and very much in the early adopter stage. However, the challenge always is, at Flex, the value for us and the value for a company like that is not the first factory, not the second, not the third factory even that we bring them into. It's the 10th and 20th factory, right? That if we can get them over those scale kind of hurdles, the change management that comes along with that, the integration into the Flex ecosystem of applications and services, then they'll scale, right? And then that's hugely valuable for them, but also for us, obviously, if we're making that investment in terms of resources and time upfront. And so, we navigate that with them, and when we meet, some great founders and CEOs, we want to be, and we sign up with them eventually, we want to be a partner for a very long time. So we're very much,
super,
very much.
Yeah. And I can see a kind of question coming in there, John, kind of somewhat related to, well, definitely related to the question that you're answering, right, around the whole, the framework around managing innovation, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say definitely what you've kind of walked through there is kind of that framework around the startup engagement as well, right? But I assume that framework is extended as well in terms of how you manage innovation internally as well. You kind of put it through a funnel, and you kind of have a selection or decision process related to that. Would that be?
Yeah. Internally and externally, I think internally, if we're building products, we're building apps, then we make sure there's the right stakeholders that are managing that. And again, Flex been around such a long time. There's a lot of platforms in the company. There's a lot of existing operational systems, that run manufacturing, that run supply chain, that are kind of table stakes, right? And so, when a new app is either being built, or certainly when a new app is coming in, we got to make sure that, from an integration perspective, from a scalability perspective, and on the new companies coming in, we also need to make sure that they can scale, right? How well funded are they? What's their plan? And make sure that their roadmap and their product plan is in line with ours, so that we can continue to scale.
Makes sense. And look, I suppose a lot of this comes down to, let's say the whole kind of trial and error and kind of seeing what's worked in the past, and, kind of back to, I suppose, good leadership kind of skills as well, right? Having kind of been through the wars to an extent, right? And I suppose, Joanne, with that in mind, right, kind of in your role in LinkedIn, I suppose, when we talk about, leadership, right? You and I have kind of talked a little bit about this, right? And, being in a leadership position sometimes can be a bit isolating, can be a bit lonely at times, right? And, what would kind of LinkedIn look to as kind of the best, traits in a leader, right? I suppose how, courage, for example, how courageous do leaders need to be to kind of take on these kind of isolated positions, right?
100%, yeah. you know, I had the privilege of working with Jeff Weiner for a couple of years, and he released recently a LinkedIn learning course that I highly recommend folks to take a look at, called On Leadership, and he defines it in 3 ways, which I think resonate very strongly with me. One, the first pillar being awareness, so having self-awareness or an awareness for, you know, the people around you and the industry that you're in. I think the second pillar is around synthesis. When you're in a leadership position, you get an enormous amount of data, and being able to kind of figure out what the signals are versus the noise is incredibly important to help then figure out what you're going to focus on. And fewer things, you know, focus is, for us, it's an acronym of fewer things done better, communicating the right thing to the right people at the right time, and speed and quality of decision making. So all of that kind of comes underneath the kind of synthesis, and then inspiration. So inspiring a team to kind of follow you in the challenge and crafting, you know, a really compelling vision. I think you brought up that other concept of courage, and I think that really resonates with us. You know, it is incredibly difficult to make. You've got a lot of information coming at you. You've got you need to make decisions, and it's really difficult to make decisions when you've got to choose the important versus the urgent, and, you know, figuring out like what everybody's alternative kind of desires are, but like, what is the best thing for the business? What is the best thing for the team? So courage, I think, is something that really stays, you know, very strongly at the core of what we do. We talk about it a lot, just, you know, and John mentioned it earlier on, just having people in your corner and having people support you and be there. So in those moments where you feel like you just can't go on, that somebody says, I've got your back and I believe in you. And I think that is, I think, a fundamental component of having the courage to kind of sit in a leadership role.
And you know, let's say I need to call it out, because in a previous discussion that we had, right, you kind of mentioned and you know, nearly coined a term for me, your personal board of directors, right? And I loved it, right? Because I think, you know, we've all kind of been there as we kind of go through our career, you know, looking for mentorship in companies, and I think, you know, your kind of approach around also having a personal board of directors as well, right? How important that is in terms of developing out leadership as well, right? And how everyone should kind of develop that.
And like, I think, you know, this should start and can start from the very beginning of your career. You know, cultivating people that you can trust and people that you admire and maybe that you aspire to be. And, you know, for me, I think I have like 6 or 7 people that I tap into for different reasons. You know, for some, it might be, I want somebody to give me like the honest truth. Tell me, you know, like, give me the hard truth that maybe a lot of people don't want to give me. I'll tap into other people for career advice if I'm like, you know, thinking about a transition or thinking and considering a change, or doing something that I know maybe even an unpopular decision. Like, you know, having people in your corner that you can bounce all of those ideas off. It could be people in your family, like, you know, for us, we have each other, but it also could be, you know, a coworker or a peer or a former boss or a current boss, or, you know, somebody who's outside of your network altogether. It could be a professor that you really like, or just a friend that is amazing at one particular area. So cultivating that and investing in those relationships is a game changer. And I think it definitely allows you then, that what we talked about earlier on, just having more confidence in yourself to take the leap of faith. And also, you know, being that confidant, you know, in those times where you just don't have it in you anymore, but being able to tap into that person on your board is so incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. I mean, let's say definitely people starting out in their career, right? Like having that person, like, you know, as you kind of said previously as well, right? It's your brand, right? You're looking after your brand, kind of run it like you might run a company, and having your own board of directors, right? And I think like that's super solid advice, definitely, for anyone starting out in careers. And even in the past, you were kind of mentioning around reaching out to people a couple of levels above you and asking for those one-on-ones as well, right? I think, look, super solid advice for people kind of that not wanting to be aggressive in terms of their career, but equally kind of looking to learn from people as well. And that whole, I just love that kind of personal board of directors, right? I really do. I think it's a great approach. It really, really is.
Yeah. I was going to add,
John?
I think on the subject of courage, and I think on the subject of leadership, and obviously having that personal board of directors, but I think as people are moving through their careers, then the courage to be transparent with your peers and your teams. I think to have trust, right, in the people that you're bringing along with you, right. Especially in team environments and people that you're working with, and then the courage to be vulnerable, right. That as a leader, you don't have all the answers all the time, a lot of the time actually. So be vulnerable for feedback, and build that trust with your teams. Ultimately, all of those, I think, lead to collaboration, right? And collaborating to get to the best solution. It takes a bit longer for that to happen, but ultimately, if everybody's in trying to figure out the problem, and everybody's in on working to the solution, and then you get there, I think the solutions last longer. The experience of that collaboration lasts forever, right? And you'll always go back there, because you've built that trust, because you were vulnerable, and you had the courage to do that. And you'll be seen as a leader in that way. But I think your teams, you bring them further along as well.
I suppose just on that point, John, around kind of bringing your teams along, right? A question just came in there from John McSweeney, right? And I suppose, in your current role, right, and back to that, bringing your teams along, do you kind of see the big part of your role being the mentor to your team, right, in terms of getting the best out of them, right? And that is, a huge part of your role, and should be a huge part of any leadership role, really.
Yes, absolutely. I really do. And I think, the big change for me in this role is we're immersed in technology, right? We're immersed in, as you said earlier, right? We're meeting a lot of companies every week, and I guess what I'm bringing now is, given that I've been experienced in lots of parts of our business, right? In operations, in the factories, on the customer side, when I was in the segment for all that time, and involved in the whole sales process and onboarding customers, and bringing customers up into large manufacturing and distribution facilities. And then on the corporate side, looking at it from, okay, now we have to serve the business, right, with all of these corporate, functions, all of these corporate applications. And, Flex is 160,000 people, 50,000, consume those applications, right? So very, very large scale in multiple countries. And so I bring all of that experience to them, but then they bring deep technology expertise, right? As we've gone into different areas, so I learn from them too. But for sure, ultimately, the value for the company is when we merge the technology expertise, the level of innovation that the team can bring to the demand that's in the business and to the problems and issues that we're trying to solve, right? So every day, I do not forget that I'm a mentor and a coach to the team. Absolutely.
I love it. Thank you. And guys, if you don't mind, I might do a bit of a kind of segue into the hot topic at the moment, COVID. And look, we have a question actually coming in from Caroline Dowling. Thanks for the question, Caroline. And it's somewhat related to one of the questions that I wanted to ask as well, to you, Joanne, primarily, right? So look, within LinkedIn, you're seeing a lot of trends, right? You guys are sitting on, mountains of data in terms of where the market is going. So what are you guys seeing at the moment? Are we seeing an increase in, remote working? Are we seeing an increase in people kind of changing jobs? Where do you see the kind of the next generation of people coming into the workforce? Like what type of trends are you seeing there at the moment?
Yeah, so yeah, we have a lot of data, and we try and kind of curate that and kind of send out a lot of materials and blog posts. So, for folks who want to keep on top of like some of the very interesting information. Definitely follow LinkedIn, because we do publish it. We're obviously publishing on LinkedIn every day, multiple times a day. I think when we think about the future of work, we used to, you know, from a people side of business, we used to think about the future of work being away in the future. And then I think 2020 came along and we realized we're in the future of work. So the future of work is flexible and equitable. I think that's where a lot of the trends are. Flexibility is at the heart of what companies now have to do. A lot of what we're doing, you know, internally at LinkedIn now is defining that long-term strategy around what does that really mean for a company like a tech company like LinkedIn. And we believe that having a hybrid work model is going to be mandatory. And that kind of then brings into the next trend, which is around learning. You know, the chief learning officer now becomes this critical role in a company. Alongside the chief people officer, like those roles just got elevated overnight. You know, from a learning perspective, you know, curating learning experiences to help your teams thrive in an environment that is a hybrid work model is table stakes now. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to do that well. So it's both kind of creating learning experiences for managers to, you know, nurture and thrive, or create an environment for their teams to thrive. But then equally, it's learning experiences for the ICs, the employees, of how to be a remote employee and how to, you know, work and create an innovation space for your team when you're not physically together. So learning is, I think, the next big trend. And this is something we had talked about as well before, Anthony, which is around well-being. You know, it's now more than ever, well-being is like you know, up in the top 3 priorities. And, you know, creating an environment where people can feel, you know, emotionally safe, mentally safe, and, you know, look after their physical well-being, like that is something that is very much top of mind. You know, at LinkedIn, we talk a lot about talent being our #1 operating priority. And then diversity, inclusion, and belonging is our #1 talent priority. So having, you know, a diverse team, creating an inclusive environment, but most importantly, and I think the kind of the game changer for us, is ensuring that you have an environment where people can bring their full authentic selves to work, and have a sense of belonging. That is kind of, we're seeing that trend throughout as well.
And let's see, what are you guys seeing in terms of, I suppose, the remote workforce, right? So, you know, you and I kind of talked in the past around the whole kind of, you know, platforms like the WorkVivos of the world, right? You know, in terms of keeping people connected, right? What are you guys seeing in LinkedIn in terms of kind of keeping connected with the remote workforce? And I suppose a lot of people have had to kind of pivot overnight in terms of, you know, being used to the regular management style of you manage people because you see them face to face, and suddenly everyone is remote, and it drives the importance of, you know, different ways of management kind of right up the chain, right? I mean, what are you guys kind of seeing?
Yeah, no, it's a great call out, and a huge shout out to WorkVivo, an amazing tech company born in Cork.
John Goulding.
So both John and I have had a chance to kind of spend time with John Goulding over the last while, and it's an incredible product. Yeah. I think, yeah, like, you know, we talk about culture a lot. And I think that is a huge topic. I think, you know, before, when I used to think of a career in HR, I foolishly thought of, you know, things like policies and procedures, and all of which are completely important and critical, and uphold the trust that employees have in you. But culture is such an incredibly important thing. So for companies that codify their culture, and then support and live that culture, it's so important. That's what attracts talent to companies. And then you think of like companies like WorkVivo that like bring that culture to life. You know, we use like employee engagement surveys to take a pulse of like how people are doing. And one of the most innovative things that we had done over the last couple of months is ask that simple question: how are you doing? And being able to understand that and get that information back and take action on it has been just been such a game changer for us. So I think that, you know, having like a clear sense of, you know, a vision and purpose of your company, codifying your culture, but then not sitting on your laurels. Like you've got to kind of work at that and keep that alive. And so having kind of products that like take a pulse of your survey or manifest that culture and bring it to life are so incredibly important.
No, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Thank you. And John, I might pivot here a bit differently as well, right? So, you know, let's say staying on the theme of COVID, kind of talking about IT strategy, you know, there's been a lot of, you know, CIOs, CTOs in the last few months that will come out and publicly state that COVID drove their digital transformation. You know, I kind of have an opinion on that maybe some of those folks are a bit behind the wheel already, or let's say asleep at the wheel already, coming up with a statement like that. But, you know, how has COVID kind of changed your IT strategy? You know, obviously you had something going into 21 and or something coming into 21. You know, how has it changed it, if at all?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it has changed it drastically. We did have, like you alluded to, I think we had a lot of the tools, I suppose, that allow for remote working, flexible working. You know, Flex is a diverse workforce anyway, and a global workforce. So, you know, I think we had invested and brought Zoom in 4 years ago. I think in my previous role, I got products like Okta in for identity management, initially for our SaaS environments, and then we integrated into the operational systems. You know, we got Box in. I think we signed an early deal with Microsoft on Office 365 and SharePoint Online, and you know, so a lot of that foundation and the building blocks for enabling collaboration, you know, remote working, flexible working were in place. I think, you know, one of the major maybe changes that we had to do when COVID hit was, and lockdown hit, was we had to get a bigger VPN from a license perspective within about a week, which our CISO, you know, had a few late nights on. But other than that, I mean, we already had the infrastructure, right? It was just expanding it. But other than that, I would say you know, we're staying on track, right? We are accelerating, you know, our hybrid cloud strategy, modernizing our dev environments, putting in a full DevOps model, which is a challenge, don't get me wrong, in terms of the scale of Flex. And we continue to invest heavily in our enterprise analytics strategy, and then we have a whole tech track around our digital factory, and combining kind of the hybrid cloud analytics insights to the factory environments, right? And what we can give, you know, locally to the factories, but also from an analytics perspective to the teams that support the factories.
And would you see, I suppose, and you're mentioning kind of around the use of kind of data and analytics, right? But would you see kind of COVID being a massive enabler around, like we've talked around automation for years, and let's say a good few companies are obviously kind of doing it, but some companies are struggling to get initiatives off the ground. But I suppose in areas like RPA and automation and AI, COVID has really kind of accelerated those efforts for sure, as kind of CIOs struggled to explain the concept or show the value of some of these kind of initiatives, right? And yes, you know, maybe like AI is kind of applicable to both, of course, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you know, we see the application of it also. I think that the difficulty sometimes in those areas is the data, right? The data is the key, because you got to get access to the data, you got to integrate it, streamline it, and then you can, you know, build your models on AI and solve maybe problems that are solved today by manual effort, and it takes longer. And of course, you get an AI model running, and it can accelerate decision making, and it can aid, you know, a functional team in particular roles. And then similarly with RPA, you know, if you can kind of build the integration points with those various systems, and you can elevate that data in a very streamlined way, you'll be successful, right? But I think just bringing the kind of shiny object of an RPA tool in, or you know, signing up with an AI company to do a model, if you don't have the data and you're not doing that kind of data engineering work to prep, then it's going to be very hard to be successful. And then the other part is, in both areas, change management is absolutely key, right? You know, you're coming into teams who have tribal knowledge, who have a depth of experience, who have responsibility and are accountable for their actions in their business function. I know you're bringing in an application that potentially, you know, is it doing their job? Is it augmenting their job? Is it helping them? And it should be helping them, you know, and they should be brought in from the beginning. And I think communication and change management is key to evolving the technology eventually, but to its success as well.
Love it. You know, let's say it just cut me off on the hop here, right? I know we talked around the time, and these sessions move so fast. I just can't believe it's 50 minutes gone already. And to be fair, I forgot to ask you, John, to bring out that that little kind of surprise you were showing me earlier. You kind of tucked it away, right, and you kind of hid it back. But a lot of prep went into this, right? So I think it's only fair that you bring it back out.
Well, I guess, yeah, if I could bring it up, you know, in the interests of you know, the fires that have been here and not lighting one to help with our carbon footprint, but also that this, you know, is being a fireside chat and a technology conversation.
I think it's only fair.
A bit of heat.
I'm going to run downstairs and turn on the immersion. Oh, I love it. And yeah, I mean, look, the time has flown, right? And look, I could stay here genuinely forever talking to you guys, right? I mean, there's so much to cover, right? And I suppose just the other angle as well, right? Before we try to wrap it up, right? So obviously, look, we've a lot of kind of students kind of coming in here as well today, and we've a couple of questions coming in actually from students. Thank you very much. So, you know, your experiences in the market, right? You know, people starting out in their career, people very early on in their career, right? What would you recommend to them, right? What do you think the skills are that are going to be in demand? I mean, it's very hard to tell, kind of back, Joanne, to your point earlier around technology is changing so fast, we're seeing innovation come so fast, it's very hard to say what the skills will be required in 10 years. I mean, what kind of advice would you give to students?
Yeah, so I would say, you know, ironically, I have a number of early in career folks on my own team, and the advice I give people is say yes to everything. You know, one thing that I still remember is, you know, when you're early in your career, you don't necessarily know what your strengths are. By saying yes to everything, you kind of figure that out on the job. And I think that's really important. I also highly recommend people to really think about, you know, the purpose of the company and make sure it connects with your own kind of personal core values. I think when you connect with the mission of a company, it just changes the game. And that's probably something that I wish I had known and thought about more at the beginning of my career. But I'm glad I know it now. So I would say yes to everything, figure out what your strengths are. Like you alluded to it earlier on, Anthony, ask for a coffee or a tea break, and, you know, ask people for 15 minutes of their time, and you'll be amazed the amount of people who will give you their time. I think, and I still do that today. I still, you know, despite where I am, if I'm interested in meeting somebody in a different company or in a different industry, I'll still reach out. But I frequently get reached out to from folks that are early in career, and I try very hard to meet them and see if there's anything that I can do to pay it forward. So that's, I think you talked a little bit as well about skills. You know, one thing that we do a lot, if I think back on, you know, some of the blog posts we'll send out, we'll talk a lot about the hot skills or the in-demand skills. And, you know, we refresh that. So using the LinkedIn data, we'll look at like, well, where are all the jobs? So right now, I think there are 14 million jobs on LinkedIn. And so we'll look at that and we'll say, what are those top trends? What are those skills? And we've partnered with Microsoft and GitHub and created learning paths to help people like learn those. So I think that's another thing I would, you know, encourage people. And then maybe the final piece of advice is the job that you probably will end up in doesn't even exist yet. And I remember, you know, when I was in my early days at LinkedIn, one of my peers said that we were having, you know, we were hosting a transformation workshop, you know, to help people understand that transformation in your career can come in big and little ways. And sometimes transformations is getting to work on a project and getting exposed to a different part of the business. And sometimes it's a promotion or a job change.
Yeah.
And I remember he said, like, sometimes, like, your job, the job that you're going to get in 5 years' time doesn't even exist. And I think about that now, and I think about even in the HR space, there are jobs now in HR that didn't exist 7 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and they're awesome jobs. So I think keeping an open mind and just constantly like trying to figure out what kind of lights you up. That's what I would say.
And you know, Joanne, just to that, and sorry, I might just ask you just one follow-on question, because there was a question that came in. You mentioned that you've some kind of people earlier on in your career or kind of in your group at the moment, and I suppose kind of, you know, driving innovation, I suppose, around having a mix of, you know, people who are, you know, in their career for a long time and people who are starting out that career. I mean, how do you incorporate them into that whole innovation mindset and, you know, get them engaged in the process and make them feel like they're part of something bigger quite quickly?
I think, you know, a lot of what we do is around teams, you know, and you're right, like, we're in a multi-generational workforce at the moment. And having kind of a diverse team come around and orient themselves around a problem is A, interesting, you know, and exciting, and B, it's almost like table stakes now at LinkedIn. So I think having that team pull together is critical. And having an environment where you have people who can feel comfortable to share their ideas. So it's that team dynamic is so critical.
I would add to that. I think, you know, one thing we do similarly is also give that team autonomy, right? Give them, enable them to, you know, and make them aware that, look, you know, when you come to a point to making the decisions and making the proposals, we're probably going to go with it. Right, you know, you get some guidance, of course. There'll be some guardrails up, but ultimately, you have the autonomy, you have the ownership, right? I think that allows people the freedom then to innovate and think and try and you know and try again, right? To ensure that they make something work. So,
and I think that they're for sure the lucky ones, right, that are kind of, you know, brought onto a role where there is that kind of innovation mindset, right, and that freedom, I suppose, freedom to make mistakes as well, right, you know, is very important, right, as kind of people figure it out, right. It doesn't always have to be right first time, right, in some scenarios, let's say, but it's that whole kind of freedom to make mistakes. No, I think, look, guys, it's all super solid advice. I mean, Joanne, kind of back to even your point, right? The jobs of the future don't even exist, right? I mean, let's say a lot of them don't exist right now, so it's very hard to kind of draw what that kind of picture is like in 10 years' time, right? But no, guys, look, as I said, look, apologies, we're kind of running kind of up towards the end, right? As I said, look, I could have talked with you guys for hours on end, right? But look, I just wanted to thank you very much. I know you guys put a lot of prep into this as well, right? We've had a good few discussions in advance, right? But, you know, most importantly, kind of thanks for just being so kind of open and honest about it, right? And kind of taking us through your journey. I'm sure, let's say, a lot of folks will learn a lot from it. So thank you very much for giving your time. I also wanted to thank kind of KPMG again, the sponsors of these events, and next month, for those of you on the call as well, we have our next event on the 15th of December. It's going to be the CIO of KPMG himself, John Applegate, will be our next interviewee, right? So Joanne, John, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the week.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. It's been fun, and all the best to everybody in Cork and in Ireland. We miss Ireland so much. So enjoy, and thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.